My dad take my inheritance to fund my brother's lavish life, but when I exposed the truth, what happened next turned their world upside down. My name is Emma Thompson and I'm 28 years old. The lawyer's office felt like a funeral parlor, all mahogany and hushed whispers. My father sat rigid beside my mother, his jaw clenched so tight I could hear his teeth grinding. My brother Michael slouched in his chair, already counting millions in his head, though he looked thinner than usual and kept checking his phone nervously. Let me paint you the picture. There we were, the Thompson family, gathered for Grandpa James' will reading. The old man had died 6 months ago. And honestly, he was the only person in that room who'd ever made me feel like I mattered. Dad had been circling like a vulture ever since, making calls to financial advisors and muttering about finally getting what we deserve. I'd always felt like the odd one out in our family. While Dad and Michael shared the same sharp jawline and dark eyes, I had Mom's softer features and lighter hair. Grandpa used to say I looked exactly like his sister Margaret had at my age, though I'd never met her since she'd died long before I was born. Mr. Brennan, our family lawyer for 30 years, cleared his throat. The moment had arrived. James Thompson built quite an empire over his lifetime. He began Thompson Industries, real estate holdings across 4 states, mineral rights, investment portfolios, and various trusts. The total estate value is approximately $187 million. The room fell silent. Even Dad, who'd thought he knew the extent of Grandpa's wealth, looked stunned. Michael's phone slipped from his fingers. To my son, Richard, Mr. Brennan continued, I leave the sum of $5 million with hopes he'll finally learn fiscal responsibility. Dad's face darkened, but he stayed silent. But Mom got her jewelry collection and the summer house worth about $8 million total. Then came the big moment. To my grandson, Michael Thompson, I bequeath $33 million, trusting he will use this wisely to build his future. Michael actually pumped his fist, though his relief looked almost desperate. I'd noticed he'd been avoiding family gatherings lately, and when he did show up, he seemed distracted and anxious. All eyes turned to me. The family afterthought. The daughter who'd chosen teaching over business, kindness over cutthroat competition. Dad looked at me with that familiar mixture of disappointment and disdain. And to my granddaughter, Emma, the lawyer read, his voice oddly flat. Your grandfather has left specific instructions. Emma gets nothing from the primary estate. She can go earn her own money like the rest of the world. The silence was deafening. Mom actually smiled. That thin, satisfied smirk she wore whenever I got put in my place. Michael snorted with laughter. Guess Grandpa finally saw through all that teacher's pet nonsense. Dad leaned back, vindicated. James finally came to his senses. Emma, this is what happens when you waste your education on finger painting instead of joining the family business. I felt like I'd been slapped. After everything, all those afternoons with Grandpa, listening to his stories, helping with his medications when everyone else was too busy, this is how it ended. But Mr. Brennan was still sitting, still shuffling papers. He cleared his throat again. However, there is one more item. He produced a thick manila envelope sealed with red wax. Your grandfather left instructions that this envelope was to be opened only after the primary will reading and only in Emma's presence. Dad's expression faltered. What envelope? There was never mention of any envelope. What came next changed everything. The room fell silent as Mr. Brennan broke the seal on that mysterious envelope. His eyes widened as he read, and I watched his professional composure crack slightly. My father shifted nervously. For the first time since we'd arrived, he looked genuinely concerned. This is a separate codicil to the will, Mr. Brennan announced carefully. Written entirely in Mr. James Thompson's hand and properly witnessed. He looked directly at me. Emma, your grandfather has left you something quite different from what we just discussed. I could feel my family's eyes boring into me, but something in the lawyer's tone made me sit up straighter. The kindergarten teacher they dismissed was about to discover that Grandpa James had seen something in me that no one else had. My dearest Emma, Mr. Brennan began reading. If you're hearing this, it means you've witnessed your family's true colors. I'm sorry for that theatrical display, but I needed them to reveal themselves before you learned the truth. Dad's face was turning red. What truth? What is this nonsense? The lawyer continued. Emma, you visit me without wanting something. You ask about my day, my health, my memories. You inherited your great Aunt Margaret's kindness along with her green eyes and gentle nature. My throat tightened. I'd always wondered why I looked so different from Dad and Michael. Now pieces were starting to fit together in ways I hadn't expected. Therefore, I am leaving Emma Thompson 51% controlling interest in Thompson Industries, effective immediately upon my death. Additionally, she inherits my complete real estate portfolio, investment accounts, and mineral rights, totaling approximately $124 million. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear my own heartbeat. Thompson Industries wasn't just some side business. It was a multi-generational empire generating over $60 million annually in revenue. And I now owned most of it, plus wealth that dwarfed even Michael's inheritance. Michael's face had gone chalk white. That's impossible. Dad runs Thompson Industries. Dad's always run it. No, Mr. Brennan said quietly. Richard Thompson has been the operational manager, but James Thompson retained majority ownership until his death. Those shares now belong to Emma along with the authority to make all major corporate decisions. I felt like I was watching this happen to someone else. Me, Emma Thompson, the kindergarten teacher who drove a 10-year-old Honda. I now controlled a business empire and personal wealth that made me one of the richest people in the state. Dad exploded from his chair. This is outrageous. Emma doesn't know the first thing about running a business. She can barely manage her classroom budget. Actually, I said quietly, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. I have an MBA from Northwestern with a focus on family business succession. I just chose not to use it the way you wanted me to. The shock on their faces was almost worth the years of condescension. Almost. But Mr. Brennan wasn't finished reading. Emma, I need you to know that your father has been stealing from Thompson Industries for the past 5 years. I have documented proof of fraudulent expenses, kickback schemes, and systematic draining of company resources into personal accounts. The theft started small, a few thousand here and there, but has escalated to over $800,000 annually. Dad's face went from red to gray in seconds. More troubling, Richard has been using company funds to pay Michael's gambling debts. Over the past 3 years, approximately $47 million has been funneled through fake contracts and consulting agreements to cover what has become a catastrophic addiction. I turned to Michael, who looked like he might vomit. $47 million. That explained the desperate relief when he'd learned about his inheritance and why even $33 million might not be enough. The real scope of my family's betrayal was just beginning to unfold. Mr. Brennan's hands were shaking slightly as he continued reading Grandpa's letter. The room felt like it was shrinking around us. The weight of these revelations making it hard to breathe. Emma, the company is actually in excellent financial health, but only because I've been quietly covering the theft from my personal accounts to prevent bankruptcy. I couldn't let 4 generations of Thompson work be destroyed by Richard's desperation and Michael's sickness. I looked at Michael, who was staring at his hands like they held answers. Michael, is this true? $47 million? His voice was barely a whisper. The people I owe, they're not the kind who accept payment plans. They made it clear what happens if I don't pay. He touched his ribs unconsciously. And I noticed what looked like fading bruises on his wrists. Dad was trying to save my life. Suddenly, his weight loss, the nervous phone checking, the desperate relief at his inheritance, all made horrible sense. He wasn't just a gambling addict. He was a man running from people who would kill him if he couldn't pay. How much do you still owe? I asked quietly. Michael's voice broke. With interest and penalties, about $52 million. The inheritance covers most of it but not all. And they want it within 60 days or... He didn't finish. But the implication hung in the air. My brother was facing death if he couldn't come up with nearly $20 million more. Dad found his voice. Emma, you have to understand. I never meant for it to go this far. It started with small loans from petty cash to help Michael through rough patches, but the debts kept growing. And these people don't negotiate. Emma, Mr. Brennan continued reading. I'm leaving you these assets because you're the only Thompson I trust to restore our family's honor. But I'm also giving you a choice. The company is yours to run, sell, or restructure as you see fit. However, I have one request. Here comes the catch, I thought. There's always a catch. If you choose to take control of Thompson Industries, you must decide what to do about Richard's employment. The evidence of his crimes is in Safety Deposit Box 447 at First National Bank. The key is taped under the bottom drawer of my desk. But remember, sometimes the right choice isn't the easy choice, and family loyalty must be balanced against justice and responsibility. The room erupted. Dad was shouting about impossible situations and desperate measures. Mom was crying. Whether from shame or terror, I couldn't tell. Michael was just staring at me with the look of a drowning man watching his last lifeline. And me, I was calculating. The kindergarten teacher they dismissed was running numbers in her head and realizing the magnitude of what I'd inherited. Not just wealth and power, but the responsibility for my family's survival. There's one final part, Mr. Brennan said, raising his voice. The room fell silent. Emma, I've also discovered that you've been receiving financial assistance through the Education Foundation for the past 6 years. One $200 monthly stipend to supplement your teaching income. This came from a trust one established because I wanted you to be able to follow your passion without financial stress while I prepared you for this moment. That explained so much. The teaching fellowship that had allowed me to live comfortably on a teacher's salary, to focus on my students instead of worrying about rent money. Grandpa had been supporting and preparing me for years without my knowledge. I looked around the room at my family, the people who'd spent 28 years making me feel worthless. Dad, who'd stolen millions to save his son's life. Michael, who was facing murder if I didn't help him. Mom, who looked genuinely terrified for the first time I could remember. They needed me now. The question was, what was I going to do about it? The car ride home was thick with tension. Dad gripped the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him anchored to reality while Mom alternated between nervous glances at me and worried whispers to him. Michael had taken his own car, probably to make more desperate phone calls to whoever was threatening his life. But I had the key to Grandpa's safety deposit box in my purse. And for the first time in my adult life, I held all the cards. We pulled into my parents' circular driveway. The sprawling colonial looked different now that I knew it was probably paid for with stolen money. Everything looked different when you understood the real cost. Emma, we need to talk, Dad said as we walked toward the house. His voice had taken on that carefully controlled tone he used when he was barely holding it together. This situation is obviously complex. Complex, I repeated, following them into the living room. That's one word for systematic embezzlement and fraud. Mom perched on the sofa edge like she might need to run at any moment. Sweetheart, you have to understand. We weren't stealing for ourselves. This was about saving Michael's life. I understand that Dad was stealing $800,000 a year for 5 years. That's $4 million, Mom. Even if all of it went to Michael's debts, that's still theft. Dad leaned forward, switching to his negotiating voice. Emma, be reasonable. You don't want the stress of running a major corporation, the board meetings, financial decisions, personnel management. It's not for you. Why don't we work out an arrangement where you maintain ownership, but I continue operations? I almost laughed. You mean continue the operations that have included systematic theft and fraud? Those were extraordinary circumstances, he said desperately. With Michael's situation resolved, that would never happen again. Dad, the people threatening Michael aren't going away just because he pays them. Gambling addicts with mob connections don't just walk away clean. Even if he pays the $52 million, what happens the next time he falls back into old patterns? The room fell silent. It was the question no one wanted to ask, but everyone was thinking. Michael walked in at that moment, his phone pressed to his ear. I understand. 60 days? Yes, sir. Thank you for the extension. He ended the call and looked at us with hollow eyes. They're giving me 60 days to come up with the full amount. If I'm even 1 day late, how much are you actually short? I asked directly. $19.7 million, he said quietly. I can liquidate some of the inheritance immediately, but not enough. I pulled out my phone and did quick calculations. Michael, if I loan you $20 million against your future inheritance distribution, you can pay off these debts completely, but there would be conditions. Hope flickered in his eyes for the first time since the will reading. What conditions? You enter a residential treatment program for gambling addiction, minimum 1 year, possibly longer depending on professional recommendation. You surrender control of your remaining inheritance to a trust managed by independent financial advisors. And you have no involvement with Thompson Industries until you can prove 5 years of recovery. Emma, Mom said, don't you think that's a bit harsh? Mom, what's harsh is letting him spiral back into addiction and putting the entire family through this again. What's harsh is letting Dad continue stealing from his own father's company to enable destructive behavior. Dad's face flushed. So, what about me? What about 25 years of building this company? You mean 25 years of managing the company while Grandpa built it, followed by 5 years of robbing it to cover your mistakes? The accusation hung in the air between us. Dad looked older than I'd ever seen him, the weight of his choices finally visible in the lines around his eyes. Tomorrow, I announced, I'm going to the bank to examine everything in that safety deposit box. Then I'm calling an emergency board meeting to discuss Thompson Industries' future. Emma, please, Dad said. And for the first time in my life, I heard genuine fear in his voice. This company is everything to me. Without it, I'm nothing. I looked at my father, this man who'd raised me but never quite accepted me. Who'd stolen millions but claimed it was for family. And felt something I'd never experienced before. Not anger, not hurt, but a profound sense of responsibility. Dad, you're not nothing, but you're also not the man I thought you were. Tomorrow, we'll figure out what comes next. The next morning, I stood in front of First National Bank 30 minutes before they opened, watching the morning rush hour traffic and trying to process how my life had changed in less than 24 hours. Mrs. Chen, my principal, had been understanding when I called to request emergency family leave, though she had no idea her kindergarten teacher was now one of the wealthiest people in the city. The safety deposit box area felt like a vault in more ways than one. All steel and fluorescent lighting and the weight of secrets about to be revealed. Box 447 was larger than I'd expected, and when I turned Grandpa's key, I understood why. The box contained 6 thick folders, each meticulously organized in Grandpa's precise handwriting. The first folder, labeled Richard's Financial Crimes, contained 5 years of documentation that turned my stomach. Dad's theft had started small, a few thousand disguised as client entertainment, but had escalated systematically as Michael's debts grew larger and more dangerous. The second folder, Michael's Creditors, contained correspondence that read like something from a crime thriller. These weren't casino debts or sportsbook losses. Michael had borrowed from organized crime figures who charged interest rates that would make loan sharks blush. The threats in the later letters were graphic and specific about what would happen if payments stopped. But it was the third folder that made my hands shake. Thompson Industries' true financial status. The company wasn't just profitable, it was extraordinarily successful. Annual revenue had grown from $40 million to $62 million over the past 5 years despite Dad's theft. Without the constant drain of stolen funds, Thompson Industries should have been generating massive profits and growing exponentially. The fourth folder contained something I hadn't expected. Emma's preparation. Inside were copies of every academic paper I'd written in graduate school, letters of recommendation from professors, and detailed analyses of my business proposals. Grandpa had been tracking my intellectual development for years, building a file that proved I wasn't just qualified to run Thompson Industries. I was specifically educated for it. At the bottom was a handwritten note. Emma, you are inheriting more than money. You are inheriting the responsibility to decide what kind of person you want to be and what kind of legacy you want to build. The easy choice would be to sell everything and walk away rich. The right choice is harder to see and harder to execute. Trust yourself, Grandpa James. My phone buzzed. A text from Michael, can you meet me for lunch? I need to explain some things about the debts. It's worse than it sounded yesterday. I texted back, Starbucks on Maple Street at noon. I had 3 hours to prepare and I intended to use every minute. First stop, Margaret Hensley's law office. I'd researched corporate attorneys online, and her reputation for protecting client interests was legendary. Exactly what I needed for what was coming. Margaret's office was intimidating by design. Glass and chrome and the kind of expensive minimalism that screamed competence. When I explained my situation and showed her copies of Grandpa's evidence, her eyes lit up with professional interest. "Ms. Thompson," she said, leaning back in her leather chair. "Your grandfather was extremely thorough. You have documented proof of systematic embezzlement, clear legal ownership of controlling corporate interest, and most importantly, the financial resources to either save or destroy everyone involved. I don't want to destroy my family, but I can't let this continue. Then we need to move carefully. As majority shareholder, you have the authority to terminate your father immediately, but given the complexity of the theft and the family dynamics, I'd recommend calling an emergency board meeting for early next week. That gives us time to prepare a comprehensive presentation and gives your family time to adjust to the new reality." "What about Michael's situation?" "The people threatening him won't wait for corporate restructuring." Margaret's expression darkened. "If these creditors are who I think they are based on this documentation, your brother is in genuine physical danger. The $20 million shortfall isn't just about money. It's about survival." As I left Margaret's office, I felt the weight of impossible choices settling on my shoulders. In less than a week, I'd gone from being the forgotten daughter to holding the power of life and death over my entire family. Time to hear exactly how much worse Michael's situation really was. Michael was already waiting when I arrived at Starbucks, hunched over a corner table like he was trying to disappear. The golden boy, who'd sailed through life on charm and privilege, looked like he'd aged 5 years in 2 days. His hands shook as he lifted his coffee cup, and I noticed he kept glancing toward the windows like he expected someone to walk in. "Thanks for meeting me," he said as I sat down. "I wasn't sure you would after everything. What did you need to tell me, Michael?" He took a shaky breath. "The debt situation is more complicated than I explained yesterday. The people I owe, they're not just taking interest and penalties. They're using my debt to launder money through Thompson Industries." My blood went cold. "What do you mean?" "Some of those fake consulting contracts Dad created, they're being used to clean drug money and gambling profits. The people I owe have been using our family business as their personal washing machine for the past 18 months. I sat down my coffee carefully, trying to process this nightmare. "Michael, are you telling me that Thompson Industries is unknowingly involved in money laundering?" "Not unknowingly," he whispered. "Dad figured it out about 6 months ago, but by then we were in too deep. They made it clear that if we tried to stop or expose them, they'd kill me and frame Dad for the whole operation." The room seemed to tilt around me. This wasn't just about gambling debts or family theft anymore. This was about organized crime and federal charges that could destroy not just my family, but every employee who worked for Thompson Industries. "How much money are we talking about?" "They've laundered about $12 million through the company over the past year and a half. The contracts look legitimate on paper, but the consulting services never existed. It's all fake." I pulled out my phone and started taking notes. "Who else knows about this?" "Just me and Dad. Mom suspects something, but we've kept her out of it to protect her." Michael's voice broke. "I never meant for it to go this far. The gambling started as just stress relief after work. But then I was winning and the amounts got bigger, and when I started losing, I thought I could win it back." "Michael, listen to me very carefully. These people you owe, do they know about my inheritance? Do they know I now control the company?" His face went pale. I may have mentioned it when I was negotiating the 60-day extension." "Why?" "Because now they know there's a new source of money," I thought, but didn't say. "Now they know they can pressure me the same way they pressured Dad." "We need to get you into protective custody," I said quietly. "Today, before they decide you're worth more to them as leverage against me than as a debtor. I can't hide forever, Emma. Even if I pay the $52 million, they'll want me to keep laundering money through the company. That's how these operations work. Once you're in for life. Unless what? Unless someone with real power decides to shut them down permanently." The implication was clear. Michael wasn't just asking me to save his life with $20 million. He was asking me to use my inheritance and corporate control to wage war against organized crime. As I walked to my car, my phone rang. Margaret Hensley. Emma, we have a problem. I've been researching Thompson Industries' recent contracts and I found irregularities that suggest money laundering operations. We need to meet immediately. I know, I said quietly. It's even worse than you think. The kindergarten teacher who'd been dismissed as the family failure was about to discover that running a legitimate business empire might be the easy part. The hard part would be staying alive long enough to do it. Margaret Hensley's emergency Saturday meeting felt like a war council. Her conference room table was covered with financial documents, legal briefs, and what looked like surveillance photos. When I walked in, she was on the phone with someone, speaking in the clipped tones lawyers use when lives are at stake. Yes, I understand the federal implications, she was saying. We need to move fast. She hung up and looked at me with grim determination. Emma, we're not just dealing with corporate crime anymore. This is a federal case involving organized crime, money laundering, and potentially racketeering charges. I sank into the leather chair across from her desk. How bad is it? Thompson Industries has been used to launder approximately $12 million over 18 months. That's enough to trigger RICO statutes, which means everyone associated with the company, including you as the new owner, could face criminal liability unless we act immediately. What do you mean act immediately? Margaret pulled out a thick folder. I've been in contact with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. They've been investigating the crime family that's been using your company, and they're willing to offer immunity to your family in exchange for cooperation. My hand started shaking. FBI? Michael told me about the money laundering this morning, but I didn't realize it was already under federal investigation. Your brother's creditors aren't just loan sharks, Emma. They're part of the Moroni family, one of the most sophisticated organized crime operations on the East Coast. The FBI has been trying to penetrate their money laundering network for 3 years. She opened the folder and showed me surveillance photos of men in expensive suits entering and leaving Thompson Industries offices. These photos were taken over the past 6 months. Do you recognize any of these people? I studied the images. One face looked familiar, a man I'd seen at company parties, someone Dad had introduced as a new client. Another photo showed the same man shaking hands with Michael outside a restaurant. This one, I pointed to the familiar face. Dad introduced him as Tony Romano, said he was interested in our manufacturing services. Anthony Romano is Vincent Marone's nephew and the family's primary money laundering coordinator. If he's been meeting with your father and brother regularly, then Thompson Industries isn't just accidentally involved. It's been specifically targeted as a front operation. The room felt like it was spinning. In less than a week, I'd gone from kindergarten teacher to unwilling heir to potential federal defendant in an organized crime case. What exactly does the FBI want from us? Margaret pulled out another document. Complete cooperation. Your father and Michael would wear recording devices to document how the laundering operation works. You would maintain normal business operations while allowing federal agents to monitor all financial transactions. And most importantly, you'd help them arrange a meeting with Vincent Moroni himself. A meeting? Why would Vincent Moroni want to meet with me? Because you now control 51% of their money laundering operation. Because your brother owes them $52 million that they expect you to pay. And because they need to know whether the new owner of Thompson Industries is going to be cooperative or problematic. I felt sick. And if I refuse to cooperate with the FBI, then you, your father, and your brother will likely be indicted on federal racketeering charges within 6 months. Even if you're eventually acquitted, the legal fees and reputational damage would destroy Thompson Industries and bankrupt your family. And if I do cooperate? Then you help the FBI take down one of the most dangerous crime families on the East Coast, save your family from federal prosecution, and inherit a clean company worth over $100 million. She made it sound simple, but I knew better. People who testified against the Moroni family didn't just walk away clean. They either entered witness protection or ended up dead. How long do I have to decide? The FBI needs an answer by Monday morning. Vincent Moroni's people are expecting to meet with you next week to discuss future business arrangements. If you're going to wear a wire to that meeting, we need to start preparation immediately. As I left Margaret's office, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Miss Thompson, we should talk about your family's business interests. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Romano's restaurant downtown. Come alone. The message wasn't signed, but I knew who it was from. Vincent Moroni. I wasn't waiting for me to decide. He was forcing the issue. I called Margaret immediately after receiving the text. Within an hour, I was back in her office with 2 FBI agents who looked like they'd stepped out of a crime thriller. Serious faces, dark suits, and a kind of quiet intensity that suggested they'd seen things most people couldn't imagine. Special Agent Sarah Chen introduced herself and her partner, Agent Rodriguez. Miss Thompson, we've been monitoring the Moroni family's operations for 36 months. Your family situation gives us an unprecedented opportunity to penetrate their inner circle. What you're asking me to do could get me killed, I said bluntly. Agent Rodriguez nodded. We won't lie to you. There are risks. But Vincent Moroni isn't going to simply forgive your brother's debts and walk away from a profitable laundering operation. Whether you cooperate with us or not, you're already in danger. What kind of danger? Agent Chen opened a tablet and showed me surveillance footage. This was taken yesterday afternoon. The video showed Michael walking to his car completely unaware of the black sedan following him. Your brother is being watched constantly. These people don't make idle threats. I studied the footage, my stomach knotting with fear and anger. What about protective custody? We can offer temporary protection, but not indefinitely. The only permanent solution is to neutralize the threat by building a case strong enough to dismantle their operation entirely. Margaret leaned forward. Emma, there's something else. Thompson Industries' legitimate business could be incredibly valuable to law enforcement's ongoing investigations. With your cooperation, we can turn the company into a controlled asset that helps us monitor and document organized crime financial networks. You want me to run a fake business? No, Agent Chen said firmly. We want you to run a real business that also happens to provide intelligence about criminal activities. Thompson Industries would continue operating normally, generating profits, and employing people. But we'd also use it to track money laundering patterns and identify other businesses involved in organized crime. I walked to the window looking out at the city where I'd grown up feeling invisible and unimportant. Now I was being asked to become a key player in the most dangerous game imaginable. If I agree to this, what happens to my father and Michael? Your father would face state charges for embezzlement, but we'd recommend minimum sentencing in exchange for cooperation. Michael would enter a federal witness protection program after helping us document the laundering operation. Both would avoid federal racketeering charges. And what happens to me? Agent Rodriguez consulted his notes. You'd remain as CEO of Thompson Industries with full FBI support and protection. We'd provide security, legal counsel, and financial backing to help you rebuild the company's legitimate operations. After our investigation concludes, probably 18 to 24 months, you'd own a clean, profitable business worth substantially more than its current value. The offer was tempting, but I wasn't naive about the costs. What about my safety during those 18 to 24 months? We'd provide covert protection and surveillance. You'd wear recording devices during meetings with crime family members, and we'd give you training in personal security and threat recognition. My phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. Looking forward to our conversation tomorrow. Your family's future depends on it. Margaret showed the message to the FBI agents. Agent Chen's expression darkened. That's Vincent Moroni's personal phone number. He doesn't usually communicate directly with assets until he's ready to make them permanent parts of his operation or eliminate them. Agent Rodriguez added quietly. I sat down heavily, feeling the weight of impossible choices settling on my shoulders. 24 hours ago, my biggest concern had been whether to help my gambling-addicted brother pay his debts. Now I was facing a choice between federal prosecution or becoming an undercover asset in a war against organized crime. What exactly would happen at tomorrow's meeting? Agent Chen pulled out what looked like a small button. If you agree to cooperate, you'd wear this recording device. We'd have agents positioned around the restaurant and a team monitoring the conversation in real time. Your job would be to act like a nervous new business owner trying to understand what these people want from Thompson Industries. Which is basically what I am, I said with bitter humor. Exactly. The best cover stories are the ones closest to truth. I thought about my kindergarten students, about the simple world I'd inhabited just a week ago, where the biggest drama was playground arguments and parent conferences. That world felt like another lifetime. I need to talk to my family before I decide anything. Emma, Margaret said gently. Whatever you choose, you need to choose quickly. Vincent Moroni isn't the kind of man who tolerates delay or indecision. As I drove home, I realized that the scared little girl who'd always felt powerless was about to discover what real power meant and whether she had the courage to use it. The family meeting that evening felt like a funeral. Dad sat in his leather recliner, looking like he'd aged 10 years in a week, while Mom paced nervously by the windows. Michael was curled in the corner of the sofa, constantly checking his phone for threats that might be coming. We need to discuss our options, I began, setting down the FBI documents on the coffee table, and we need to be completely honest with each other for the first time in years. Dad looked up with hollow eyes. What options? We're trapped, Emma. These people don't negotiate. They own you or they eliminate you. Tell me exactly how this started, Dad. Not the sanitized version. The truth. He was quiet for a long moment, then began speaking in a voice I'd never heard before. Defeated, ashamed, utterly broken. It started 3 years ago when Michael's gambling debts hit $2 million. I thought I could borrow from company accounts temporarily, pay back the money within a few months. But the debts kept growing, Michael added quietly. Every time I promised to stop, something would happen. A sure bet, a hot tip, a system that couldn't lose. I kept thinking the next big win would solve everything. Mom sat down heavily. I knew something was wrong, but every time I asked questions, you both told me it was just business stress. I should have pushed harder. Mom, they were protecting you, I said. If you'd known about the money laundering, you'd be facing federal charges, too. Dad's head snapped up. Money laundering? How do you know about that? I explained my meetings with Margaret and the FBI, watching their faces cycle through shock, fear, and something that might have been relief. When I finished, the room was silent except for the ticking of Mom's grandmother clock. So, our choices are prison or becoming FBI informants? Michael asked. Or we try to handle this ourselves and probably end up dead, I replied bluntly. Vincent Moroni isn't going to let us walk away from a $12 million laundering operation just because we ask nicely. Dad leaned forward. Emma, you don't understand how dangerous these people are. I've been in meetings with Vincent's nephew, Tony. They talk about violence like normal people discuss the weather. They've shown me photos of people who tried to cross them, which is why we need federal protection. Dad, you and Michael would testify about how the laundering operation works. Help the FBI build their case and then enter witness protection if necessary. What about you? Mom asked. What would you do? I took a deep breath, still not entirely believing what I was about to say. I'd stay and run Thompson Industries as an FBI asset, help them monitor criminal activity while rebuilding the company's legitimate operations. The room erupted. Dad was shouting about the insanity of putting me in danger. Mom was crying and begging me to just sell everything and run. Michael was apologizing over and over for dragging the family into this nightmare. But underneath their panic, I could see something else. Hope. For the first time since this crisis began, we had a plan that didn't end with someone dead or in prison. There's something else, I continued when they'd calmed down. The FBI thinks Thompson Industries could be worth over $200 million once it's free from criminal involvement. The legitimate business has been incredibly profitable despite the theft and laundering. If we cooperate and survive the investigation, we'd emerge with a clean, valuable company. Dad looked at me with something approaching awe. Emma, a week ago, you were a kindergarten teacher. Now you're talking about running a major corporation while working undercover for the FBI. Are you sure you can handle this? For the first time since this whole crisis began, I smiled. Dad, I've spent 6 years managing rooms full of 5-year-olds. How much harder can it be to manage organized crime figures? Despite everything, they laughed. It felt good to remember we were still a family, even if we were a family in crisis. So, we're really doing this? Michael asked. I looked around the room at the people who'd shaped my life, who'd hurt me, disappointed me, but also loved me in their flawed, complicated ways. We're doing this tomorrow afternoon. I'm having lunch with Vincent Moroni, and we're going to start the process of taking our lives back. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Chen. Equipment ready. Training session tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Are you in? I typed back, I'm in. The kindergarten teacher, who'd been dismissed as the family failure, was about to become the most dangerous woman in the room. The FBI training session took place in a nondescript office building downtown. Agent Chen led me through a crash course in wearing recording devices, recognizing danger signals, and how to exit a conversation if things went wrong. The recording device itself was smaller than a shirt button and virtually undetectable. Remember, Agent Rodriguez explained, your goal isn't to get Vincent to confess to specific crimes. We just need him talking about the business relationship with Thompson Industries. Let him do most of the talking. Criminals love to explain how smart they are. What if he asks direct questions about continuing the money laundering? Be vague but not evasive. Say you're still learning about the company's operations and need time to understand all the business relationships. That gives you room to maneuver without committing to anything. Agent Chen showed me photos of the restaurant layout. We'll have agents at 3 tables and 2 on the street. If you feel unsafe at any point, order a Diet Coke. That's the signal for immediate extraction. At 1:45 p.m., I walked into Romano's restaurant wearing a conservative business suit and the kind of nervous energy that didn't require acting. The maitre d' led me to a corner table where 2 men were already waiting. Vincent Morone was smaller than I'd expected, probably in his early 50s with the kind of expensive casual dress that screamed money and power. Tony Romano sat beside him, the man from the surveillance photos who'd been masquerading as a Thompson Industries client. Ms. Thompson. Vincent stood and extended his hand with old-world courtesy. Thank you for meeting with us. Please sit. I shook hands and sat down, hyper-aware of the recording device and the FBI agents positioned around the restaurant. Thank you for the invitation. I'm still learning about all aspects of my grandfather's business interests. Your grandfather was a smart man, Vincent said, signaling the waiter for drinks. He understood that successful businesses require flexible partnerships. Flexible partnerships. Tony leaned forward. Thompson Industries has been providing consulting services for some of our associates. Very specialized work that requires discretion and reliability. I see. I kept my voice neutral. I'm still reviewing all the company's client relationships. Some of the consulting contracts seem quite lucrative. Vincent smiled, and there was nothing warm about it. Your family has been very helpful to us, Miss Thompson. Your father and brother understand the importance of maintaining good relationships with valued partners. Of course, though, I have to admit, I'm still learning exactly what services Thompson Industries has been providing. Document management, Tony said smoothly. Financial record keeping, helping our associates organize their business transactions in ways that satisfy regulatory requirements. Translation, money laundering. But Vincent was too smart to use explicit language, especially meeting someone new. That sounds like important work, I replied. I assume our partnership would continue under the new ownership structure. Vincent's eyes hardened slightly. That depends on several factors, Ms. Thompson. Your brother Michael owes our associates a significant amount of money. Your father has been accommodating and helping us resolve the situation through creative business arrangements. Creative business arrangements. The consulting contracts I mentioned generate substantial fees that have been applied toward your brother's outstanding obligations. It's been a mutually beneficial relationship. I nodded thoughtfully, trying to look like a naive new business owner slowly understanding the implications. How much does Michael still owe? $19.7 million, Vincent said without hesitation. Plus ongoing interest, of course. That's a substantial amount. Your inheritance should make it manageable, Tony added. We understand you've come into considerable resources. There it was, the real reason for this meeting. They wanted to know if I'd continue paying Michael's debts through the laundering operation, and they wanted to assess whether I could be intimidated or controlled. My inheritance does provide certain opportunities, I said carefully. Though I'm sure you understand that any business decisions need to be made carefully and legally. Vincent's smile disappeared. Ms. Thompson, let me be direct. Your family's financial well-being and physical safety depends on maintaining our business relationship. Thompson Industries has been an important partner to us, and we expect that partnership to continue unchanged. The threat was unmistakable, delivered in the kind of calm tone that made it even more frightening. I felt my heart rate spike, but I kept my voice steady. I appreciate your directness, Mr. Marone. As I said, I'm still evaluating all aspects of the business. These are significant decisions that require careful consideration. Of course, he replied, but his tone suggested that my consideration period would be brief and that the conclusion was predetermined. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes with Vincent and Tony providing just enough detail about the money laundering operation to give the FBI everything they needed while making it clear that my cooperation wasn't optional. As we prepared to leave, Vincent placed his hand on my arm, a gesture that looked friendly but felt like a threat. Miss Thompson, I look forward to a long and profitable relationship. Your family's future depends on it. Walking out of that restaurant, I realized I had just crossed a line I could never uncross. The kindergarten teacher was gone forever, replaced by someone I didn't entirely recognize, someone capable of smiling at dangerous men while secretly recording evidence that could send them to prison for life. The debriefing session at the FBI office stretched past midnight. Agents Chen and Rodriguez had listened to the recording 3 times, taking notes and exchanging looks that suggested the meeting had gone even better than they'd hoped. Vincent gave us everything we need for money laundering charges, Agent Chen said, reviewing her notes. He explicitly described using Thompson Industries to organize business transactions and satisfy regulatory requirements. That's textbook laundering language. More importantly, Agent Rodriguez added, he made direct threats against your family's safety if you don't continue the arrangement. That gives us extortion and racketeering charges. Margaret Hensley had joined us for the debriefing, and she looked both impressed and concerned. Emma, you handled that beautifully. You got him talking without seeming to push for information. What happens next? I asked, exhaustion finally setting in. We start building the case, Agent Chen replied. Your father and Michael will need to provide detailed testimony about how the laundering operation was established. We'll need documentation of every fake contract and every dollar that was moved. And then? Then we wait for Vincent to make his next move. Based on that meeting, he's expecting you to formalize the arrangement within the next few weeks. When you don't, he'll escalate pressure, probably through more direct threats or by having his people show up at Thompson Industries. The thought of Vincent Marone's men walking into the company offices, intimidating employees, and potentially endangering innocent people, made my blood boil. How do we protect the company's legitimate employees? We increase security and surveillance, Agent Rodriguez said. And we move as quickly as possible to arrest the key players before they can retaliate. Margaret pulled out her legal pad. Emma, there's another issue we need to discuss. As CEO, you'll need to address the board of directors about the company's situation. They have a right to know that Thompson Industries has been unknowingly involved in criminal activity. The thought of facing the board with this information was terrifying. These were people who'd known me since childhood, who'd watched my father build his reputation over decades. Now I'd have to tell them he'd been systematically stealing from the company and enabling money laundering operations. What exactly do I tell them? The truth, Margaret said simply. That the previous management engaged in financial crimes. That you've discovered evidence of money laundering and that you're cooperating with federal law enforcement to clean up the company's operations. Agent Chen leaned forward. Emma, we understand this is overwhelming. You've gone from inheriting a company to becoming a key witness in a federal organized crime investigation, but what you're doing could help us dismantle one of the most dangerous criminal enterprises on the East Coast. And if something goes wrong, if Vincent figures out I'm wearing a wire or decides I'm too dangerous to keep alive? The room fell silent. Finally, Agent Rodriguez spoke. We won't lie to you. There are risks, but Vincent Marone has killed people for smaller reasons than what your family has already done. Cooperation is your best chance, maybe your only chance of surviving this. I thought about my kindergarten students, about the simple world I'd inhabited just 2 weeks ago. That Emma Thompson felt like a character from someone else's life story. When is the next phase? Vincent will probably contact you within the week, Agent Chen said. He'll want to formalize the arrangement, specific contracts, payment schedules, maybe introduce you to other people in his organization. Each contact gives us more evidence and brings us closer to having enough for arrests. How many more meetings like today? Probably 3 or 4 over the next 2 months. Then we'll have enough evidence to move against the entire Moroni organization. 2 months. 60 more days of smiling at dangerous men while recording evidence that could save or destroy my family. 60 more days of pretending to be someone I'd never imagined becoming. As I drove home at 2 a.m., I realized that the woman looking back at me from the rearview mirror wasn't the same person who'd walked into that lawyer's office 2 weeks ago. She was stronger, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous than the kindergarten teacher had ever been. The question was, would she survive long enough to find out who she was becoming? My phone buzzed with a text from the same unknown number. Pleasure meeting you today. Looking forward to our next conversation about expanding our business relationship. Vincent Moroni wasn't waiting for me to decide. He was moving forward with plans that assumed my cooperation. The next phase of this deadly game was already beginning. 6 months later, I stood in the same boardroom where this journey began. But the person facing these familiar faces was someone entirely different from the kindergarten teacher who'd once felt invisible in her own family. The morning's headlines were spread across the conference table. Moroni crime family dismantled in federal raids. Thompson Industries CEO helps FBI break money laundering ring. And from teacher to undercover asset, the Emma Thompson story. The board members filing in looked at me with expressions ranging from awe to concern to genuine pride. These weren't just corporate colleagues anymore. They were partners who'd watched me transform their company from a criminal front into something clean and powerful. Good morning, everyone, I began, taking my place at the head of the table that had once seemed so intimidating. Before we review our quarterly results, I wanted to update you on the conclusion of the federal investigation. I paused, looking around the table at faces that had become genuinely familiar. Yesterday, Vincent Moroni was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. His nephew, Tony Romano, received 15 years. The entire money laundering operation has been permanently shut down. And Thompson Industries has been officially cleared of any criminal liability. The room erupted in applause. Patricia Wells, the board member who'd watched me grow up, wiped away tears. Emma, what you've done, the courage you've shown, it's remarkable. The company is also more profitable than ever, I continued, pulling out financial reports that would have been fantasy numbers a year ago. Without the constant drain of stolen funds and with our reputation for integrity restored, Thompson Industries has posted record revenue of $87 million this quarter. David Martinez, our CFO, nodded approvingly. Emma, the employee profit-sharing program you implemented has created the kind of loyalty and productivity we've never seen before. People are invested in the company's success because they share in that success. Which brings me to my next announcement, I said, pulling out documents I'd been preparing for weeks. I'm implementing the employee ownership transition we discussed last quarter. Every person who works for Thompson Industries will receive equity stakes proportional to their years of service and contribution level. The vote to approve the transition was unanimous, though several board members insisted on maintaining significant equity to ensure leadership stability. After everyone left, I sat alone in the boardroom thinking about the journey that had brought me here. A year ago, I'd been humiliated in a lawyer's office by people who thought they knew my worth. Today, I was running a company that employed over 400 people, had been featured on the cover of Fortune magazine, and was being studied by business schools as a model of ethical corporate transformation. My phone buzzed with a text from my former teaching colleague. Saw you on the news again. The kids still ask about Ms. Emma. Are you happy? I smiled thinking about that question. Michael was 18 months clean and sober, working as a counselor in a residential treatment facility and slowly rebuilding his relationship with money and responsibility. Dad had served 6 months in minimum security prison and was now working with Margaret's law firm, helping other family businesses identify and prevent financial crimes. Mom had started a nonprofit organization providing support for families affected by gambling addiction. We were still a family, just a different kind of family. One built on truth instead of secrets, support instead of enabling, and genuine care instead of manipulation. Outside my office window, The sun was setting over the city where I'd grown up, feeling like I didn't belong anywhere. Now I belonged exactly where I was supposed to be. Not because of inherited wealth or family connections, but because I'd chosen to become the person my grandfather always believed I could be. The FBI agents had protected me through months of dangerous undercover work. But the person who'd emerged from that experience was someone I'd protected and developed myself. The scared little girl who'd been told she wasn't good enough had grown up to prove that she was better than anyone had dared to imagine. Thompson Industries had become more than just a successful business. It was proof that integrity creates stronger foundations than shortcuts, that character matters more than connections, and that sometimes the people who believe in you most are the ones who see your potential long before you recognize it yourself. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money or property. It's the courage to become who you were always meant to be. James Thompson had given me more than a company or a fortune. He'd given me the gift of believing in myself, and that gift had multiplied into something beyond his wildest imagination. The kindergarten teacher they dismissed had become someone who could smile at organized crime figures, work undercover for the FBI, and rebuild a family business empire, all while never forgetting the values that had made her worthy of trust in the first place. The little girl who'd been told to go earn her own money had done exactly that. And in the process, she'd earned something far more valuable,